You could argue that there are a handful of iconic songs from the 60s that every musician learns to play. Four of these are, of course, The Who's My Generation and Can't Explain, and the Kinks' You Really Got Me and All Day and All of the Night. All of these songs were produced by our guest, Shel Talmy. Shel Talmy's credits include not only The Who and the Kinks, but early songs by David Bowie. He also recorded hits like Friday on My Mind by the Easy Beats, which incidentally Bowie covered on his Pin-Ups album. Shel also recorded songs by The Creation, including Making Time, which in 1966 featured an electric guitar recorded with a violin bow. Shel worked with Manfred Mann, did 3 albums with folk rock pioneers Pentangle, worked with Ralph McTell, Roy Harper, solo Burt Jansch, Nicky Hopkins, and many, many more. Shel caused quite a storm when he insisted on using 12 mics on Keith Moon's drum kit. He was told there'd be multiple phase issues, and yet now, when we get to listen to Keith Moon's incredible playing, it has such amazing definition, which is sorely missing from many of the other 60s 4-track recordings. Shel was a pioneer, and one could argue that by being instrumental in getting these bands signed makes him one of the most important producers of the 60s. I feel very privileged to be invited into Shel's home and talk about his illustrious career. So without further ado, let's get to Shel. Hi everybody, hope you're doing marvelously well. I feel incredibly lucky to be sitting with the rather wonderful Mr. Shel Talmy. You, without argument, have worked on some of the most important records ever made.
Being in the right place at the right time helps, but I suppose that I was lucky to be able to do that also.
What was the name of the studio again in America that you cut your teeth in?
It's called Conway.
Conway.
The original, Conway's moved eventually to become, and still is, one of the major band studios. Excellent studio, and it's where I learned from Phil Yen, who owned the place.
How old were you when you started?
21, 22, something like that. I'd actually been working for ABC television for a year and a half, and I was leaving because I couldn't take the politics. It was really disgusting. So I used to hang out. Do you remember Martoni's? Martoni's was the hangout place in Hollywood for the music biz. And I was there, and where I met Phil, and I told him I was leaving ABC, and I was trying to find something to do, and he said, "How would you like to become a recording engineer?" I said, "Great, so it's me." So that's how all that happened.
What were you doing for ABC?
I was a page, then I did cue cards, and then I started doing some floor management. I worked a whole bunch of shows, including I worked Liberace, I worked for Sinatra specials, I did all kinds of stuff.
And how long were you working at Conway before you came to England?
A year and a half, I think.
It's quite a meteoric rise.
In terms of doing engineering, I was tossed out the deep end. Phil showed me how to operate the board. 3 days later, I was at a solo session. And
do you remember who that first solo session was?
No, it was a jazz band. I know that. It was like jazz. I have no idea who the hell they were, but they were about, I think there were 6 of them. I got everything mic'd properly. Everything was, all these recording, great. Then they wanted an edit, which I had never done. And I'd seen Phil do it, and at that point he was doing it freehand with a pair of scissors. And that's the only way I knew how to do anything. So I must have sweated off about 10 pounds trying to do this damn edit, and I finally got it somehow, and then charge him for an hour. Yeah, then I started, I did doing nonstop session. I did with a whole bunch of people. I worked with practically all of the wrecking crew, which was great. So, and then I started working on trying to improve ways to record stuff, which is how I ended up with a dozen mics.
Well, firstly, I want to know, as an American, how did you find yourself in London in the 60s in such an incredible, fertile, vibrant time for music?
Well, I started out as a recording engineer here in Los Angeles, and the man I was working for was English, and it was Conway Studios, the original Conway Studios, and he kept telling me how great London was and how I should visit, And I finally said, okay, I give in. I will go for 5 weeks and visit London and see some of Paris and, wherever else I can go for 5 weeks, and I'll be back. The reason why I stayed as long, well, because of the fact that before I left, I took the precaution of talking to my friends about the fact that it would be nice if I could work for a week or two because I didn't have a whole lot of money. Specifically saw Nick Vinay, who was the A&R at Capitol and a good friend, and I told him about it, and he said, I really hadn't produced anything. He said, here, take a couple of my acetates and tell me that you did them. So, maybe they'll get you a gig. I said, okay, cool. And I took them. Anyways, got to London, and I had, because of people I knew, got in touch with somebody that they gave me the name of, who arranged for me to have a appointment at Decca Records with Dick Rowe. I chose, because I was in my early 20s, and I was only going to stay for 5 weeks, to be brash, because I thought everybody expected Americans to be brash, so what the hell, why not? And I kind of walked in and said, hi, Dick, and by the way, I'm arguably the best producer since sliced bread was invented. Here's a couple of things I just did, and I gave him Nick's acetates, one of which was Lou Rawls, and the other was the Beach Boys, and he said, you start today. So, so that's how I got my job as an independent producer, which I stressed I must be, because at that time in England, as you probably know, all the A&R guys were strictly on a salary with no royalties. And I said, by the way, I get royalties. Dick, who was fortunately very pro-American, said, fine, we'll give you royalties. So, so that's how I got into it. Perhaps in retrospect, they were testing me because they gave me 3 Irish harmonica players, the Bachelors, and who did nothing but play harmonica. And I had them up at my little flat for about 5 or 6 weeks, teaching them what to sing and how to sing and what to do in harmonies and who was going to sing lead and all that kind of stuff. And the first record I did with them was Charmaine, which was a big hit. So by the time they found out everything I said was BS, I already had a hit.
Well, obviously at that time, I mean, British music was obviously incredibly influenced by American music. So
yes, that's absolutely.
Probably a breath of fresh air coming in.
Well, it was pre-Beatles, before they really hit it big. And having started out as a recording engineer, I spent a lot of time actually working out better ways to record things, which I brought with me, which included using 12 mics on drums, which nobody at that time, either in England or in the US, was doing. They're using 3 or 4 mics. And of course, I was told I couldn't do that because it would phase. And I said, well, I guess you just have to wait and listen. And a month later, everybody was trying to use 12 mics. So,
were you at that point pretty much exclusively working out of Decca?
I was, yes. I was, albeit that I was an independent producer. But I was working out of Decca. I was attempting to make other contacts with other people and other labels. And what finally drove me to it was the fact that one of the things I was expected to do was bring in talent for Decca. And so I'm enjoying going out damn near every night of the week. The 2 bands I brought in were Manfred Mann and Georgie Fame. And I did 4 sides with each of them at Decca Studios. And I really expected them to be signed, and they were both rejected. And I thought this is probably a time for me to be independent. So the next band I found was the Kinks. I took them straight into Pi. I was, I guess, in the right place at the right time. I was visiting friends on Denmark Street, one of the publishers, and Robert Weiss, who was one of the Kinks managers, walked in with an acetate, and he said, "Anybody here would like to listen to this?" There was nobody in the reception room except me. I said, "Yeah, I'm here, I'll listen." And so I did, and there were the Ravens at that point. I liked a lot about what I heard, and made a deal I was going to sign them, but I didn't have a whole lot of money, so I took them into Pi.
What was the first song you recorded with them?
The first things I was told to record included one of Little Richard's songs. I forget which one it was, and a couple of other things that they decided I had to record. None of which the band or I wanted to record, and none of them, of course, ever happened. Ray and I and the band got together, and he then said, "I've written a song. I think it is excellent," which happened to be "You Really Got Me." And I heard it, I said, "Yeah, absolutely. It's great. Let's go do it." And
Incredible.
That's how that all happened.
I have to ask, obviously, everybody talks about Dave Davies as taking a razor blade to the speaker.
Yes, that he did do.
That he did do.
Yes.
That's incredible. I was talking to a friend of mine about that when I told him I was going to interview you. And he said, that's pretty bold for a young band who probably don't have a lot of money.
It was a cheap speaker.
I suppose you get asked all the time about the guitar solo?
It's finally slacked off after I've responded probably about 5,000 times that Jimmy Page did not do the solo and that Dave Davies did. And at one point, Jimmy did actually claim to do it, but then he eventually said, "No, I didn't do it. Dave did it."
Yeah. I did read that fairly recently that Jimmy said, "No, I didn't do it." But I still have to ask the obligatory question.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I love that solo. It sort of has a naivety that sounds like a band.
No, it is. And it became kind of iconic, I think,
I agree.
is fair to say, especially including the opening chords are iconic.
So obviously they have that absolutely massive hit. What was the next part of the process when you're dealing with a label? Do they want more singles, or are they just putting money down to make an album?
They wanted more singles, but they wanted an album also, yes. And so we did both, and we planned ahead to do both. Ray, fortunately, was very prolific in terms of writing. I mean, he literally could go home and write, half a dozen or dozen songs and come back the next day with finished songs. So that made life a lot easier. Everything worked out nicely, and in terms of the things I chose did become hits. The album was very well received, and we kind of went on from there. I used Bobby Graham for drums, by the way, because at that point they did not have a drummer. And Bobby Graham was the drummer to go to in England at that point in time. That made life a lot easier also. So he was on "You Really Got Me" and on the album.
Obviously, the first single, "I Can't Explain."
Right.
Absolutely iconic as well.
We got connected because their managers, who were Kit Lambert and Chris Stamp, knew a girl who worked for me part-time, asked her if I would go and listen to them play, which happened to be at a church hall. The first thing I heard was "I'm a Man," that Daltrey sang. And after about 8 bars, I said, "Yes, I'll sign you." So, because they were at that time the best rock band I'd heard in England. That sounded like they were American rock band. Of course, I was American oriented, so that's how we got into that. I think he had just changed the name to The Who, but they were the High Numbers, obviously, before that.
So what was the experience then? Were you given money to go straight into the studio and cut singles? Or?
Actually, I financed it. I had enough money at that point, because I'd had some hits, to go in and finance it myself. So I signed them to my label, which was Planet Records. And however, I had to go find a major label for distribution. And eventually I went to America and made a deal for them with, as it turned out to be, American Decca, who of course no longer part of English Decca. They were all extremely nice gentlemen, in many from their 70s and 80s, and really had no clue what the hell I was doing. But they wanted to catch up because they heard rock is the thing to do. So finally it got broken by somebody a DJ in Chicago. I did offer it because I liked the people at Decca, and they turned that down also. But of course, the ironic thing is that it came out on Brunswick, which was an American Decca label, and was distributed by English Decca. So, so whether they liked it or not, they in fact were releasing The Who.
What was the first songs you recorded?
I Can't Explain.
Amazing.
And the second one was Anyhow, Anyway, Anywhere, and the third was My Generation.
I mean, that's just absolutely insane that three of the biggest rock songs in all time were recorded consecutively.
Right.
I Can't Explain is one of my favorite guitar riffs. So it's such a hooky guitar riff.
No, he did a great job with that. And they did, maybe they still do, they have led off every concert with I Can't Explain. I'm not sure they still do because I haven't seen them in ages, but it's perhaps the case because it's still a favorite by Who fans.
Now, you've got a band there of virtuoso musicians as well. I mean, incredible drummer who famously didn't have a hi-hat in those days.
No, I didn't need one.
Was using a crash cymbal, that's correct? As a hi-hat?
Yeah, he was, yeah.
Incredible.
He was brilliant. I really thought was the best rock drummer I'd ever recorded or ever would record.
You know, Keith's work on My Generation is incredible. That whole last minute of just chaos. I mean, the song is such an important song for kids of that generation.
Well, it's certainly been credited with starting a whole bunch of genres that didn't exist, including hard rock and all kinds of things that, punk and you name it. I've heard all these things before that they were the progenitor. There was a progenitor for all these various other genres. And
I believe that's true.
Well, that's nice. Thank you. But it's not what we planned on. It's just the way it worked. Nor did we plan on My Generation becoming an anthem, which it did. So I guess in that way, it will last pretty much forever.
I noticed fairly recently there was a demo that surfaced with Pete singing with the stutter.
Pete singing with a stutter?
Yeah. As though there's a demo of My Generation where he's singing with the stutter.
Oh, well, obviously he took that from Roger.
Right. Do you have a recollection? Because that's a debated subject about how that came about.
Yeah, it's very simple. Roger was screwing around during rehearsal and decided just to stutter. I said, you know what? You got to keep that in. And of course, the BBC banned it because it was detrimental to stammerers and stutterers. So, of course, it immediately enhanced sales of Generation.
I do remember as a child, anything that would get banned by the BBC pretty much secured that it would become a top 10 single.
Yeah, it was, and it got right up there.
And then, of course, John Entwistle, basically bass solo.
That is the iconic bass solo of all time, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What did you work on after The Who?
A whole bunch of things. Manfred Mann.
By that stage, it obviously got
Creation.
Creation, incredible.
Pentangle, Easy Beats, Small Faces, all kinds of people.
Was there any studios that you preferred in those days?
I preferred IBC studios.
IBC?
Yeah, I liked IBC a lot. It was very well maintained. They had excellent equipment. They built a lot of their own stuff. And it was acoustically, it was great. It was an old Victorian, maybe even Georgian house that had a preservation order on the ceiling because it was one of those great ceilings, and the acoustics are terrific. So I really enjoyed working there, and I worked at dozens of studios, including Olympic. I liked a lot, and Morgan I liked later on, and a whole bunch of studios.
You did My Generation at IBC?
Yes. Leading up to that is that I spent about 3 or 4 hours just with Pete working out how to mic. I wanted to mic his overtones and the distortion. So I finally worked out a way of miking his amp with a mic about a couple inches away, and then one about 3 feet away, and then one on the other side of the room that would pick up the rebounds. And then combined all those, and that's the sound that you hear. That's the guitar sound you hear.
I love that sound. And did he detuned the guitar like a whole tone flat so he could get those voicings? Yeah,
he did. He did a lot of stuff. He was very good guitarist. Basically, he was really a rhythm guitarist, but he's probably the best rhythm guitarist that ever existed. So,
absolutely.
He was very good, and he's another one who could go away and write songs and come back the next day with a half a dozen. So,
what was the Manfred Mann that you did after The Who?
I brought Manfred Mann into Decca. Like I said, they were turned down on me. And when Paul Jones left and they took on Mike Dabo, Jerry Braun, their manager, came to me and said, since you recognized their talent early on, would you consider producing them now? They had just signed to Philips. So I said, yeah, okay, I'll do that. I had like, a string of 3 hits with Mike Dabo, Just Like a Woman, which was a Dylan song, Semi-Detached Suburban Mr. James, and Ha Ha Says the Clown. And I did an album with him, which also did well. I also did an instrumental EP with Manfred, doing kind of jazzy stuff, which was fun.
How did you end up back in America?
I took a plane. I was there as, 17 years.
17 years,
and I probably should have come home about 6 or 7 years before I did. The business had changed, and so, but anyways, I stuck it out, and I came back in 1979.
By the sort of mid-late 70s, was there any like punk bands and stuff that wanted to work with you? Because you're right.
I did one punk. I did The Damned.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And I did that only because I did not want to condemn all of punk until I actually did one. And so I did a couple of sides of them. They were great. They were really nice guys. And I had fun doing that. And I'm told that those singles, there's only a limited amount of them, are changing hands at extremely high prices.
You were right, as you were saying earlier, about the Who's influence being so massive. The Kinks as well. The Kinks, were new wave, punk bands, the Who the same. It's just, they had the pop songs, but with the attitude. And you captured that so well.
Yeah, well, they wanted to succeed, and was one of my major criteria for seeing other bands is wanting to find out if they had the fire in the belly, because if they didn't, then I wasn't interested. I didn't want some lackadaisical kind of situation. I wanted an artist who really wanted to be a superstar. Whether they achieved that or not was almost immaterial. It would be nice if it happened. Not everybody could, but I needed somebody who really wanted to be up there.
Do you feel like that's one of your skills, is to see star power in artists? Realizing there's something more?
I don't know. I think somebody will have to judge that or not. What I think I am good at is picking songs that could be hits, because that's pretty much what I did throughout all the stuff I did with everybody. Somehow or other, I know a song that I kind of sympathized with what the public liked. I chose songs I thought they'd like, and it worked out that way. Well, I found Bowie because a friend of mine called me and said that he found this kid who was 17 years old, and he thought I should meet him. So he brought him up to my office. I liked him immediately because he reminded me of me. He was brash. And I heard some of the stuff he did. I liked it a lot, and I signed him.
Was that as Davy Jones? David Jones?
Yeah, and then he changed it midway because of the Monkees, Davy Jones, obviously. So we did a whole bunch of things, and unfortunately, what I eventually discovered was, this first and the only time it ever happened to me, we were about 4 or 5 years ahead of the market. The things we did were great and got some action, but never really became hits. And it wasn't until he did Space Odyssey that he really hit, and that was like 4 or 5 years later. And the stuff that we had been doing was kind of what he did from that point on.
Oh, yes, of course. So you did Pentangle, Sweet Child.
Well, I did actually 3 albums with Pentangle.
I'm a huge Burt Jansch fan.
Right.
I'm sad to hear that he died about 10 years ago.
Yes, he did.
Yeah. Wasn't that old either.
And Renborn was not that long afterwards.
Yeah, very sad indeed. Incredibly important band. I'm not sure if they ever became successful in a large degree in America, but...
They did very well in America, but they never toured enough. They did a very short tour there, and I forget, they did one of the major, like Carnegie Hall or something like that. But they never toured enough. They should have done it extensively, and they didn't.
You have a Jimmy Page credit solo. What was that?
I used Jimmy Page a lot of stuff. I mean, I kind of found Jimmy Page going back to the beginning. He was on the Kinks stuff. He was on the Who stuff. He was on a lot of stuff. I had him playing rhythm on the first Kinks record because Ray wanted to concentrate on singing, not playing.
Oh, I see.
So, no, I used him wherever I could. He was great. Same thing I did with Nicky Hopkins. I used him wherever I could.
And in those days, it was all presumably about getting musicians to perform together because you had a limited amount of tracks. And I understand now why it makes sense of like why you want to bring in somebody to play a rhythm part so a singer can be free to sing.
No, at that point, we're talking about nobody would consider doing a record instrument by instrument. Everybody had to play together. As far as I'm concerned, that's the only way it should be done, because otherwise whatever feel something has is lost.
What are your best memories? What are things that you treasure, experiences you had?
I'll give you a mundane answer here because I can't think of any way to express it. When we did good sessions, which I always tried to do, then I was extremely satisfied. And I've got memories. Obviously, do I like the records I did that were huge hits better than others? Probably. But however, there are a bunch of things that I recorded I think should have been hits and weren't, that I think as much of as the ones that were hits.
You did work with Ralph McTell as well.
I did, and that was turned out to be unfortunate. I mean, I never knew why until recently that we were recording stuff again at IBC. The label was crazy about what we were doing, and he then ran away and went to Cornwall, I believe. And the story I heard was that he did not want to become famous because he would not then be able to drink with his pals at the pub. I just recently read that, in fact, he was having mental problems and stress problems, and that was the major contributory factor.
So tell me a little bit about Lee Hazelwood.
Lee and I had the same attorney, who was Marty Machat, and Lee and I became friends. And when he was about to turn 40 and do an album, he asked if I would produce it, and that I would choose all the material rather than any of the stuff that he would normally do. I said, oh, sure, that sounds like fun. So I did. And again, we were at, I think we were at IBC and a couple of other studios. And I had David Whitaker, who was one of the great unsung arrangers, did the arrangements for the stuff. And I'm very pleased with the way that album came out.
That's a beautiful record. Do you remember how you met Alex, how you got to work with him?
His management, and I forget what they were called, came to me and said that he was about to do an album. Would I produce it? And I said, sure, I knew who he was. I said, yeah, fine, I'll do that. Let's go. Let me go talk to him, which was interesting because I needed a translator. And the same with the band was a bunch of nice guys. I wish I'd understood what the hell they were talking about the first week. Eventually, I tuned in, and you know, we finished the album, and I think everybody was happy about it. And then the management, as I recall, died in a plane crash not long thereafter.
Oh, for those who don't know, they're very, very strong Glaswegian accent.
Yeah, that and Gorbals and Geordie are the two accents in England that most English people can't understand. So I didn't feel that bad about it.
I remember watching some MTV footage a few years ago, and they had subtitles running underneath.
I'm not surprised. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me in the slightest. No, it's a fun album to do. I like that album a lot. And I can't remember who it is that re-released it, but I'm sure you can find that out. Yeah, well, he's another one that died young.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So great shame because he was excellent, good talent.
His brother was a phenomenal guitar player,
Really?
wasn't he?
Didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah.
His brother wasn't in the band.
Oh, he was electrocuted on stage playing with
Really?
Stone the Crows. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
That's kind of ignominious way to go.
Yeah. It was an unearthed microphone. He touched it. Yeah.
I did a session with Nashville Teens.
Yeah.
And the guitarist was again shocked because of the microphone. Fortunately, he survived it. But boy, it was really startling to say the least. Actually, he got up and we finished the session.
Wow.
Yeah, boy, I haven't thought about that in years.
Yeah, Leslie Harvey, Alex's brother.
I'll have to look him up and listen to him.
You'll love his playing. He was a really beautiful player. You remember Stone the Crows with Maggie Bell? I mean, she had such a monster voice. Incredible.
Yeah, she had a great voice. Yeah.
Do you have any? This is just the geeky part. Do you have any like particular pieces of equipment that you always feel like you go to?
I never collected it. Oh, that I go to?
Yeah, things that you really.
I still I love the 1176. I thought it was a great piece of equipment, and most studios still have one or
Absolutely,
two.
Yep.
And I love them. I thought I know how to use them, and they're great. They're good fun to use.
Microphones, any preferences?
Oh yeah, I'm a big fan of U87s and D12s and SM7s in particular. Really, I think are way underrated mic. And I've used it. I started using it for vocals, and it turned out to be a great mic for vocals. I'm at the point now, where there's ton of other mics. If something doesn't sound right, I'll say, let's change it, and I'll use something else. Yeah, I still like using them because they're easy. I know what their capabilities are. I know if I'm using them in Omni or in Cardioid or whatever. Yeah, all good fun.
Fantastic.
I'd like to be back in the studio doing some stuff, but
Well, I hope you get back soon.
Yeah, me too. It'd be nice. It'd be fun to do that. Fortunately, the world, at least it's officially opened up now, so we'll see how it works out.
Yep. Of all the experiences you've had, all of this great stuff, the fact that you've been instrumental not only in recording some of the most influential songs of all time, but also helping develop the artists that have influenced everybody.
Well, I think the only thing I can really add to what we've been saying is that they're like any other producer that I know. There are certainly other artists I'd like to have recorded, but didn't get a chance to. I feel sorry about that because if they wouldn't have benefited, I sure as hell would have. So, but it didn't happen. But you can't work with everybody.
You work with some of the greatest artists of all time, and
right.
I really appreciate your time.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks ever so much. Thank you.
Okay.